Hello, so this is my reflection of what my lesson plans looked like. Sorry, I was going through this and I start at the beginning. These lessons took place where we were talking about the post-war society after World War I and leading into the economy that emerges after. Um, so for the first lesson, we talked about the Roaring Twenties, and this is really important to start the rise of the economy in the 20s because it was such an erratic period for the economy. So what we did was the students listened to a little lecture about what it was like in the early 20s in the Western world and how they were still recovering from the effects of World War One. The students talked about what kind of problems they had that might affect the nations recovering around the world. We talked a little bit about what countries thrived and what countries were suffering the most after the war, before the actual Great Depression, though. After this, we talked a little bit about the Jazz Age and how it rose during the 20s. And then the students were given their activity. They were paired and just with a partner, and they were given a scavenger hunt, which is a really fun activity because it gets them involved in the textbook, but it also gets them involved a little bit of time crunch when you put a sense of urgency on a task. And I'll look at in the next slide what they actually, a little portion of what they had them do. The first 3 pairs they finished with all the correct answers. They got a homework pass for the day, and those who didn't win had to just write a one-check paragraph on an overall summary of what the Roaring Twenties were all about. The homework pass people could have used it at this time or could use it any other time they want to in this semester. And like I said, this is a little bit of what, a little section of what the scavenger hunt looked like. So each group was given, each pairing was given this scavenger hunt, and they had to complete it in the order that it was set up, because it was set up to go with the book. So when they thought they had the correct answers for all of that section, they raised their hand, and I came by and checked it. If they had all the correct answers, they moved on to the next section. But if they had anything wrong, it was circled, and they had to find what they had answered wrong and fix it. Until they fixed it, they couldn't go on to the next portion. This lesson was fun because it kind of created a little bit of a competition in the class, and they all were really engaged in trying to finish it first. So that was really cool to see. The only thing is I would probably not let them pick their partner, or maybe let them work in groups of 3 instead, because it was kind of barely enough time for them to finish. A couple of people didn't finish at all, and I really wanted everyone to try to finish in that time period so they had all the answers. But yeah, the next lesson was talking about the stock market crash, and we talked a little bit more, like reviewing the economic boom of the 20s and how after the war a lot of the economy was on the rise, but the wealth wasn't evenly distributed across the board. We talked a little bit about the Federal Reserve and how it failed in the stock market crash. A lot of people did not know what the Federal Reserve was, but they kind of have an idea now, I think. After this, the activity that we did was they were given like a page and a half of headlines and like brief bits of articles from the 1920s, and they all talked about how the stock market was on the rise. The stock market's doing great, stock market's fantastic. Even going to like 1929, everyone was saying, stock market's doing great, beginning of October, everything's great. But it would soon decline, and that's what I wanted them to really look at, and to analyze how the headlines reported such a bright future when in actuality the market was failing. And then I gave them a table of the Dow Jones average closing levels at the end of each month for a little over 2 years. And they created a line graph with the month on one side and then the closing number on one side. And they line graphed it, and it kind of just displayed the ups and down roller coasters that was the stock market during this period, which is really important for students to be able to grasp. For the last part of the day, students analyzed the effects that each of the following contributed to the outbreak or spread of the Great Depression, and wrote a couple sentences to reflect on the impact. So I wanted them to reflect on the falling demand, the Federal Reserve, because that's something they really need to get a grasp for, and the financial crisis that was the end of the 20s. This was pretty successful. Most people were able to finish. That wasn't really a problem as far as time went. We actually had a lot of time left over, which was kind of burdening because you kind of start to lose the classroom management, which kind of freaked me out a little bit. But all in all, it worked for the most part. But this is an example of what the headlines that I looked at were. So these are just two of them. I think I gave them 10 different headlines to look at, and most of them were in the middle or towards the end of 1929. And then to the right is the month and closing level for almost a little over 2 years, and that's what they used to create the line graph. And they had like see when the peak of the market was, and then look at the like end result and how far it actually dropped and how shattered the economy was. It's kind of shocking to look at it, so that's cool for them to see. And they all kind of liked it. They were all kind of shocked that it was that bad and that it led to the Great Depression, and that was what we talked about next. So this day we looked at the Great Depression and how it affected the entire world. Because when you think about the Great Depression, you kind of just think about the U.S., but because of the U.S. being in the Depression, it had such an impact, which is really important to understand in order to understand the world's economy and the world's market at the time. So we talked about how the world tried to find ways to lift the Depression, and how like Britain set up their new government. It took longer for France to feel the effects, and Roosevelt's offering of the New Deal. For this lesson, we really just wanted to focus on the New Deal because it was what worked for the United States for the most part. I mean, it took a couple tries. The students are going to be given a graphic organizer, and they had the one side has a problem, and I wanted them to answer how FDR found the solution to this problem with their textbook or any other information they had. I just walked around and watched. Most kids were finished with the activity pretty quickly. I said in my lesson plan that should take about 15 minutes. It probably took a little under, but not too much. So the students had a lot of time. A lot of them just kind of sat there, which scares me, again, like I said before. But we talked about it after the class, and then we're talking about what countries were failing and losing their faith in democracy, because so many during this period were kind of just about to give up on the whole idea of democracy at this point. So as an exit activity, this took only about 10 minutes. Like, we had a lot of time during this class. So I'd probably, if I did this lesson again, try to include like one more activity, or maybe, yeah, it's just one more activity probably. But they wrote a brief prediction about what they think is going to happen with these countries that can't sustain on democracy. So countries like Italy and countries like Germany, who are going to fall to fascism. And then they used them as exit zips for the day in order to leave. This is an example of what the graphic organizer looked like. It's a pretty basic as far as graphic organizers go. But on the left side, they had the problem, and they had FDR's New Deal and how he responded to that problem, like citing specifically. So next, we talked about the rise of fascism, which is fun for me, which I guess not a lot of people find fascism and communism fun, but it works. So at the beginning, we talked a little bit about what they already know about socialism and communism from the previous unit on the Russian Revolution. We talked a lot about it during that period, and really defining what the two mean and what the differences are, and like what countries are actually considered fascist and which countries are communist. We talked a little about totalitarianism, just so they have an idea of like what each definition actually means. And then we talked a little about why would a country flee from democracy, because democracy is supposed to be like the holy grail of answers, and then allow fascism, which is, we know, such a horrible thing, to actually rise, because the people allowed this. So it's really important for the kids to know like why. So we talked a little bit about what totalitarian government is, defined, like I said, one of the key traits. Students were provided with another graphic organizer to fill out the presentation. They looked at different information on fascism, values, characteristics, differences in communism, similarities with communism. This is also a pretty basic graphic organizer that I had seen before, and it fit nicely into the students' notebooks. So after the students have filled out their organizer, they answered 3 exit questions. I think I ended up doing one more, but I didn't put it on here. So how does a totalitarian state attempt to make its citizens obey its rules? What does a totalitarian economy look like? Students, yeah, I had one more. I don't remember what it is right now. I could look it up though. But students they had mixed answers for them. Some were pretty basic. Not a lot of people gave a lot of specific examples because they just really wanted to leave. But it was a fun activity because they liked the idea of actually putting it on the board to be able to leave. So that was fun. That's something I learned from one of the classes that I had last term. This is what the organizer looked like. Values, characteristics. Like I said, pretty basic. Nothing too crazy in here, but these are always good for when they have like tests and stuff, and it's really easy to find the information. So they're kind of resourceful, and that's why I like graphic organizers. For the final day, we looked at Nazi Germany, which usually gets most kids' attention, in my opinion. It got most of their attention for sure because it's Nazi Germany, and I find it fascinating at least. So we talked a little bit about fascism at the beginning, and we talked about answering the question, how did the Treaty of Versailles affect the economy of Germany in the 1930s? So this made the kids draw back to what they'd already learned about the Treaty of Versailles and the ending of World War I. Students need a general description in their head as we go through the changes in Germany's government. And we discussed what hyperinflation is and how the economic unrest left unrest in German society, and how this kind of led to the rise of Hitler as chancellor and all of that fun stuff. I guess it's not fun stuff, but after this, the students got their presentation about Nazi Germany, and they were provided with, again, another graphic organizer, which seems kind of repetitive, but like I said, it's the easiest thing for students to really get all the information. I feel like this is really important information, so that's what I decided. We talked about the Weimar Republic and what the government was like under that, how the Nazi Party rose, and what Germany looked like under the Nazi Party, and how the rise of anti-Semitism, whatever, rose. At the end of the lecture, the students have filled out the organizer. They will independently answer the following questions. And I asked for more than just 1 or 2 sentences. Like, I wanted really solid answers for these. So I asked them, what are the basic features of the Weimar Constitution? What kind of political and economic problems did they face? Kind of evaluating how those affected the world and how those affected the rise of the Nazi Party. And then how did Hitler and the Nazi Party establish and maintain a totalitarian government in Germany? I mean, no one tried to overrule them. They ruled by a majority. I mean, they managed to stay in for so long. And why did Germany support Hitler? Why did they stay with him? Why didn't they vote somebody else in or try to get rid of him? But I mean, the German economy flourished under Hitler, so I mean, there's a lot of good answers. And I think the kids found that kind of interesting because you think Hitler horrible, but for Germans, their economy was so much better with him because of their refusal to pay off war debts. So that's kind of cool. But this is the graphic organizer. This is actually one I got out of the textbook, so I thought it was just simple for kids to follow along because there's, again, like I said, a lot of dense information. So it's really important to condense it into a very easy way of putting it. So finally, the parts of this that I relate back to the What Should I Do book have to deal mostly with assessment and evolving the curriculum, because that's the hardest thing for me, I feel like, is finding good assessment ways. And I feel like looking at graphic organizers or even looking at some sort of charts are really good value charts because they have so many opinions on things. As far as curriculum goes, following the standards is it's a newer concept for me since I've only taught a handful of lessons before this. So making sure to get in the information I need plus pair it with what I need for the book, I found to be kind of hard to an extent because some of the things in the book talk about urban settings, and the school I'm at is definitely not in an urban setting. So, yeah, that's my lesson plan.